Good morning. Thank you, Case and Penny. Thanks to the organizing team, and thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here. As the debates over cities, planning, and climate change intensify, governments are coming out with ambitious urban plans to respond to climate impacts. These plans involve extensive reconfigurations of built and natural environments, massive economic resources, and they promise ecological security and the perpetuation of economic growth. Yet, they often raise intractable social questions, including decisions about how and what to protect on sites that are already home to marginalized urban residents. Academic research and practice in the fields of planning, architecture, engineering, and public policy each engage parts of this problem, but divisions in how we see and do things have blinded us to the interconnected processes that link environment, space, and sociopolitical contestation. So in my research, I argue for a new kind of sociospatial analysis to understand the ways in which environmental projects are now intertwined within dominant modes of global urban development, and the ways in which alternative visions to these dominant modes are formed and might be harnessed towards a more equitable, transformative planning practice. So in my dissertation, I took a specific cut into this problem. I explored sites and strategies in New York, Jakarta, and Rotterdam, and investigating the dominant plans, usually large-scale, top-down, state-led, and as well searching out the alternate narratives, what I call the counterplans. So in New York, post-Superstorm Sandy, the high-profile rebuild by design competition on the one hand, and grassroots recovery efforts by community organizations and movements like Occupy Sandy on the other. In Jakarta, particularly vulnerable to climate change and flooding, the proposal for a giant seawall, itself a new city for 1.5 million people, and efforts by poor urban residents living in informal kampong settlements to organize and propose alternatives to displacement and eviction. One striking similarity is the presence of Dutch actors and institutions in both New York and Jakarta. And I follow the flow of ideas and influence back to the Netherlands, where large-scale forces have redefined and redirected environmental planning. So we see the dominant plans in each urban region, the interconnections on both national and municipal levels, and the contestation, alternate ideas about the future of the city. So these initiatives represent contested visions in response to social and environmental challenges with different, often oppositional objectives, priorities, and methods. And they bring to light institutional power relationships, the histories and geographies of race and class, systemic oppressions and systems of marginalization, and the political economy of place, which is to say urban spatial politics in a new context of global environmental change. So in my research, I inquire into the ways in which these contested visions are produced and gain power, particularly in the face of climate change and uneven social and spatial development. Today, I'll focus on a more direct question: how climate changes urban design. So the impacts of climate change present a number of critical risks to urban centers, threatening health and safety, livelihoods, systems, and services. And cities are attempting to adapt to these impacts. So world cities and economic ecological coalitions position themselves as obvious actors and places to address climate change threats. And this often results in infrastructural unevenness and the making of exclusionary premium ecological enclaves. Finally, processes of urban policymaking are accelerating and crossing scales and levels, what researchers call fast policy regimes, and the interreferencing of urban models. So scholarship in planning, particularly on urban adaptation, has tended to reinforce divisions between social and spatial. It has assumed urban politics to be contained and cohesive, And it has relied on static conceptualizations of the city as a bounded territory, what David Walksmith alluded to yesterday. And it has neglected the multifaceted role of design. So, and this question of design particularly begs both for exploration and precision. Its core theoretical lineages now show their limitations, faced with a new set of interconnected challenges. Climate change first and foremost, but as well the pervasiveness of globalization, increasingly connected urban grassroots social movements, and the preponderance of mega projects changing the urban world. So the bigness of our problems appears to demand a reconsideration of big utopian visions. I ground my research in theories that explain social and spatial power relationships in the urban, and theories of the interrelationships between social, ecological, and technological processes in and through cities. And I developed a method of urban relational analysis to study disparate yet connected urban sites, taking cues from precedents for a more reflexive approach to case selection and analysis, and those that call for a relational reading of sites, each understood through the others. So I'll make 3 claims from my research. First, urban natural environments have long been sites of contestation, with urban social and ecological change co-determined and co-produced. And for the dominant plans in both New York and Jakarta, even though often planned within globally linked and oriented partnerships, tend to be reformatted by and for the socio-spatial systems in which they are embedded. So in other words, global values recursively transform as they embed in local places. And in each of the sites, historical trajectories and geographic conditions give form to social and environmental marginalization, and as well to forms of resilience. Second, in exploring the new geographies of concept mobilities, I trace the networks and institutions in adaptation planning from New York and Jakarta back to the Netherlands, where economic restructuring and climate change have prompted a shift in Dutch planning, what Wendy de Hoog talked about yesterday, beyond national projects such as the Delta Works, towards, on the one hand, local urban scale interventions like the Room for the River program and water squares in Rotterdam, and on the other hand, the development of international relationships between Dutch agencies and firms, and cities and countries around the world. So, oops, a little bit behind on the clicking. So first, to take a static view of relationships between nation states and cities, what we actually find is a multi-scalar, multi-level network through which capital, knowledge, and influence flow. These networks are empowered by colonial and post-colonial relationships, the inherited conventions of global development, and now the imperatives of climate change. And what's notable are the ways in which national strategy is operationalized through cities. So urban networks like Connecting Delta Cities and entities such as Deltaris, a Dutch research institute, are part of new relationships that start to pull the global and urban together. And finally, in examining the ways through which ideas and visions attain power, I find that design is multivalent. It is simultaneously process, practice, and outcome, and is often invoked towards specific political ends. So for the big plans, design negotiates between the structure of the organization and the sociopolitics of its context. In New York, for Rebuild by Design, the effort to bridge cultures and to merge competition with collaboration, US and Dutch models, resulted in an emphasis on participation and communication. For the Jakarta Giant Seawall, certainly a technically ambitious project, Dutch consultants highlighted symbol and culture through design. The plan of the seawall is shaped like the Great Garuda, Indonesia's national symbol. And according to a Dutch hydrologist, the design changed, quote, a Dutch development aid project into a national ambition. So design here connects the pragmatic to the emotional. Here's a sketch. So on the other hand, for kampong activists in Jakarta, design is a platform for organizing. It makes political vision tangible. Says a local activist, quote, "We proved that a collective planning process could be made by the community themselves in ways that were concrete." So for them, design connects the emotional to the pragmatic. Importantly, the counterplans are networked across geographic scales as well. So in Jakarta, the network of organizers, activists, and researchers link the immediate site through larger regional scales and as well more abstract levels of governance. And this kind of counter-network presents a way of thinking of new reflexive modes of contestation and resistance. In New York, design efforts were particularly communicative, aligned with normative planning principles. And for the Big U project, designers attempted to hybridize Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs, meshing top-down and bottom-up. And this was, by all accounts, a successful design and community participation effort. But it's met debate and contestation early in its implementation phase. In this case, design works to engage communities and to win grants, for those of you familiar with Rebuild by Design, and capture imaginations, but it's limited by an inability to change social relationships and political structures. As an example of an alternative, I'll bring up a project I'm involved in. Prior to starting my PhD, I designed a community center for the Red Hook Initiative in Brooklyn. And Red Hook RHI works with youth who live in public housing. The RHI space was designed in a collaborative process by and for community. And Red Hook was one of the hardest hit neighborhoods during Sandy. RHI's space survived the storm, and in the days following became a hub of grassroots recovery efforts. Staff from RHI took the lead, working with Occupy Sandy and state agencies. The space itself became a soup kitchen and recovery command center. And in Red Hook, community building, social and environmental resilience, and space and design are inextricably interlinked. The counter network here is particularly interesting in that it expands and coalesces across time, propelled by an unforeseen event, Superstorm Sandy. So it's not that one project changes that much, but that this one project is embedded in a broader process of organizing for social and political change. I'm going to skip a couple. Based on my research, I think that urban design research needs to push dramatically forward in a number of areas. First, to build on relational reflective research methods that enable nimble, extensive, and deep engagements with phenomena that are simultaneously local and global. Second, to develop more effective analytical concepts and categories to bridge the spatial physical aspects and sociopolitical processes of built and natural environments. Third, to engage the processes and practices of design as a research object, not as a somewhat vague design research, but with radically new approaches from within the methods and knowledge claims of our disciplines. And I'll end by elaborating briefly on a couple of issues. So an important proposition in my research is that urban adaptation is simultaneously social and spatial. So I developed a set of typologies for adaptation research that focuses on the level of cohesion of both social organization and spatial form of the strategies. Because what I would like not to do is to overplay this dichotomy between top-down, bottom-up, local and global, because in fact, the proponents of the dominant plans themselves have to some extent advocated for participation, and the counterplans are themselves multi-scalar and network. So a new way of understanding these forms of adaptation allows us, I think, to learn from both these kinds of plans. And finally, a critical project of design in recent years has been to assert the centrality of urban ecologies in understanding and ordering urban form. Researchers and practitioners have unearthed and exploited the complex interplay of built and natural, and contested the false dichotomies of nature and city. They've shown us that the operations of urban ecologies transcend traditional planning and political boundaries. So now, the critical project would be to extend these frameworks, to give form to the relationships between urban ecologies and two sets of interconnected forces, that of global urban development and grassroots movements for social change. Thank you.